Are we on? Yes. Okay. Welcome to the Planning Commission for Monday, March 27th, 2023. Can we call the roll, please?
Okay, Commissioner Heap is excused. Leek?
Present.
Mitchell?
Present.
Moreno?
Present.
Phillips? Excused. Stewart?
Here.
Counselor Afghan, I think he's logged on. Counselor Afghan, can you hear us?
Thank you. Do we have a connection with Councillor Afghan? There he is. Hope you're somewhere sunny and warm.
Yes, I am here. Thank you.
Would you like to give us a council update, please?
It would be Lake Oswego.
Oh, okay.
You bet.
Cold and spring.
I think I'm going to share with you two council updates since we didn't have a meeting a couple of weeks ago. There was a ODOT presentation regarding the tolling on I-5 and 205. Our focus was very focused on 205, and it appeared that the majority of the city council did not like the idea of the tolling where the ODOT is proposing to have them, because it will put stress on Lake Oswego, and their answers to
I think we have some buffering issues. Councillor Afghan, are you there?
mitigating those stress points. Is this better?
Well, we can hear you.
Is this better?
Yes.
I think you had just cut out there for a moment, but.
On ODOT, I told them that I personally, because it certainly is going to put pressure on Lake Oswego. The bus barn was Lake Oswego School District bus barn location was also a topic, and the decision that DRC had made was reinforced, and the bus barn was approved by a 7-0. We had ministerial development mitigation. The conversation was very rich, and the final conversation was that we would like to have the democratic process do its job. So there was not a consensus amongst the city councilors about what direction we wanted to go, and the decision was that the Planning Commission would come forth with their proposals, and the City Council will make a vote. The city manager to sign if the city employees, different cities in Clackamas, cannot report to their own cities, they would report to the nearest city. So we support each other. As you may have seen and heard, LORAC, Recreation and Aquatic project, had a groundbreaking ceremony. So the project is a go. There were some executive sessions, mostly on real property negotiation, and of course a lot of public comments on pickleball. So those are the updates I have from City Council. Do you have any questions for me?
I do. Is the city going to take a position with ODOT regarding tolling? I mean,
Yes.
I watched the meeting and you all spoke nicely to the woman who was giving the message, but you were all against the tolling. What is the city going to do to formally codify that?
Westland, Oregon City, and Lake Oswego have joined together, and they, I believe, they prepared the letter to send to the state representatives and also Senator Wagner, saying that we all recommend to pause the project and hear all the concerns and have a public hearing before this project moves forward. So our mayor, Joe Buck, is very active in that team and trying to make sure that our voice is heard.
How does the council feel about the possibility of putting it on the ballot for a vote for the whole state?
There has been some conversations. I don't know what other city councilors think about that idea, but I certainly, if that's the case, I certainly want to have the larger population to make that decision. The challenge that the conversation some of us are having, even outside of the city council, is why did the state fund 217, Highway 26, and not 205?
Exactly. Anybody else have a question for Councilor Afghan? Seeing no other questions for you, I appreciate the update very much. Very helpful indeed.
Thank you very much. And if you don't mind, I will excuse myself.
Okay, thank you. Do we have anyone who wants to make a public comment for issues that are not on the agenda? Thank you. I have nothing for Commission for Citizens Involvement updates to announce. And then we go to minutes, to approving the minutes for February 13th and February 27th. Are there any amendments or changes to either one of those sets of minutes that commissioners would like to make? And seeing none, then I would like to vote on both of them together to approve.
I move to approve both sets of minutes from February 13th and February 27th.
Thank you. Do I have a second? Second. Thank you. Roll call. Lee? Approve?
Metro,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Phillips,
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. The minutes for February 13th, 2023 and February 27th, 2023 are approved. We next move on to Commission for Citizen Involvement, and this is the Johnswood Upland Neighborhood Association boundary change request. And I turn this over to our planning staff.
Thank you, Chair Leek, and the rest of the Planning Commission. I wanted to just briefly, before I get started here, bring up a couple folks from the Uplands Neighborhood Association and the Johnswood Homeowners Association. So today with us to speak a little bit about their request, we have Thomas Bland, Chair of the Uplands Neighborhood Association, as well as Susan Hum, who's the Johnswood HOA or Homeowners Association Chair. So I don't know if you want to introduce yourselves and say anything about yourselves before I go into the request, but go ahead if you do.
Yeah, so I'm Tom Bland. I'm the chair of Uplands, and I'm also on a lot of other not-for-profit boards in the city, but Uplands is my main focus for this.
I'm Susan Hum, and I'm the chair of the Homeowners Association for Johnswoods.
Excellent. Welcome.
Yeah, so the process was actually quite, when I think back, it was probably about 4 or 5 months that we went through in order to decide whether this was going to happen or not. And Susan and several other people from her board, or your Homeowners Association, came over and met with our board. And we talked about the pros and the cons and what, how that would positively affect us and potentially negatively. And after hearing, your board's input and the fact that you have some people really interested in emergency preparedness that we really need that in our neighborhood association. And that we had a lot of commonalities. We have a common boundary, and we're, really, I don't know why we weren't, you weren't part of us in the beginning, but you weren't.
We never were assigned a neighborhood association. I'm not sure why.
Johns Woods is kind of an island unto itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, with the roads kind of do that to you.
Yeah, and we're surrounded by
Mountain
Mountain Park. Right.
But anyway, we really didn't have any problem, and we had unanimous approval of our board, of the Uplands board, to have them join us. But then we had to go through a process basically with Erik. I wrote a letter to you all, and I wrote a letter to
Our homeowners.
your homeowners, and then there was a period of comment that was available, and I had one person call me from their neighborhood association who was not angry. He was just trying to find out information, and I guess he called you later, and there was really no negative.
Yeah.
I never heard anything negative.
We held our annual meeting last October and did a presentation for the homeowners that came and answered questions, and everyone there was very interested, and we were still at the beginning part of the process, so we didn't ask for a vote at that time. Then, we communicated more with the neighborhood association and decided we wanted to move forward. And so Tom wrote the letters, and we also, through email, asked our homeowners to vote. We have 79 home sites, and each homeowner, so if there are co-owners, each co-owner could vote.
It's interesting, very few HOAs have that two co-owner vote thing.
Yeah, it's in our bylaws, so we received responses from 50 homeowners,
And 73 homeowners.
80 homeowners, actually. 80
80
homeowners, 73 were in favor, 7 were in opposition to it. And for no defined reason. No one could tell us why, they just didn't want it. So that's a pretty good turnout for us.
Yeah,
We were
great.
pleased.
Yeah, and I have some slides here prepared to talk through a little bit about the process and sort of the criteria that we have in the citizen involvement guidelines that we would use to consider such a request. So I can just briefly go through those while we're here today. Of course, I'd first point out that we're technically meeting under the guise of the Commission for Citizen Involvement as opposed to the Planning Commission. Whether or not you were aware of this, you actually wear two hats. The Planning Commission also serves as the Commission for Citizen Involvement. And so this is sort of, again, the guise under which we're coming to you with this request. So we have some citizen involvement guidelines here in the city that were adopted back in 2009. They could probably use some updating, but not necessarily this section. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the criteria that we look at for just general neighborhood association boundaries before we get going too much in depth to this discussion. One thing I would point out is that they're intended to represent as large of an area as possible, consistent with common identity and social communication, and that they should consider features, practices, and history that contribute to a common interest of the residents in the area, including common travel patterns such as pedestrian, transit, auto, and bike, common land use patterns, common history, common planning and development decisions affecting the character of the area, and governance boundaries that are previously existing. We also have some criteria that we ask neighborhood associations to abide by when they make a request for a change to their boundaries. So it's outlined in the guidelines that neighborhood associations or citizens may propose boundary amendments to the CCI at any meeting of the Planning Commission. So basically their proposal would need to explain the reason for the desired amendment, demonstrate that it's not really based on a narrow issue, and that it's the boundary amendment is the best way to resolve the problem when you look at alternative approaches. So basically, we also just want to point out that, as we've already heard about tonight, the group requesting the amendment must also demonstrate how many members of the affected associations or areas support the proposed change. So the way that we've interpreted this in the past are we look at the residents of the area where the boundary would be changing. So that's what we would interpret this to be for the homeowners within the Johns Woods Homeowners Association boundaries currently. And so this is just a really quick summary of the requests that we received from the folks at the Uplands Neighborhood Association and Johns Woods Homeowners Association. They wanted to include essentially the Johns Woods boundary within the Uplands Neighborhood Association. They wrote a letter to the Commission for Citizen Involvement, and they also wrote a letter from the Uplands Neighborhood Association to all 79 households within the Johns Woods Homeowners Association. So that was sent out. As Susan just discussed, there was a vote via email of the folks within the Homeowners Association. So out of those 79 households, 80 people, 80 co-owners were able to vote, and 91% voted in favor. They identified shared issues and interests due to proximity along Boones Ferry Road, and they felt that the residents in Johns Woods would be better represented through the Uplands Neighborhood Association than just by the HOA alone. Of course, neighborhood association recognition or inclusion within the neighborhood association allows you to apply for neighborhood enhancement program grants, and as well it also gives you the opportunity to formally comment through a neighborhood association on tree removal or land use applications, things of that nature, where neighborhood association comments are treated differently than comments from those in the general public. So here's a quick map of the area of Johns Woods, just showing the current sort of boundaries of the Uplands Neighborhood Association. You can see that dashed boundary is the area of Johns Woods that would be annexed, if you will, into the Uplands Neighborhood Association. So 79 tax lots, as we had pointed out before, really comprising all of Tempest Drive, Duncan Drive, and Majestic Court. As we've noted, it's currently not recognized as a neighborhood association by the city. It's not included within the Mountain Park Homeowners Association, and there's actually no access from within the Mountain Park Homeowners Association. So I thought that was another interesting kind of land use pattern that was deserving of some type of recognition with these boundaries. So just to talk a little bit more about the criteria, we had actually received originally a request from folks within, I think Gary Sharp actually originally contacted me, another person within the Johns Woods Homeowners Association. And the idea was at that time, could we just form our own neighborhood association? And we had advised back when that was originally received that typically we would want neighborhood associations to meet that criteria that they represent as large an area as possible. So that's kind of one of the reasons why we had given them a little bit of direction to talk to either Mountain Park or Uplands about potentially joining forces with their neighborhood association. We did find, though, that the Johns Woods area did share common travel patterns with Uplands. Both areas are accessed from Boones Ferry Road, and again, there's really no access from within Mountain Park to the Johns Woods Homeowners Association area, and Mountain Park includes a number of different sort of smaller homeowners association within their umbrella of neighborhood associations, and Johns Woods is not one of those. It's not included within that organization. There's some other common land use patterns, notably R10 zoning. I just wanted to quickly point out that the request does not include inclusion of Johns Woods in the Uplands R10 overlay district, so that would continue sort of with the boundaries as is. Really, it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of planned unit developments in Mountain Park and other areas surrounding this area, but there are no real planned unit developments in Johns Woods or the majority of Uplands, at least the R10 portion of Uplands. And of course, there's a lot of sloping topography that's common to both areas. When it comes to planning and development decisions, we do receive a number of what we call RID variance applications or residential infill design variance applications in each of these neighborhoods. Not a ton in Johns Woods, I guess. It's a fairly small area, but we have received a couple of them within that small geography. There's also, we received sort of applications for delineation of resource protection areas in those areas as well. So we do find that there is a lot of commonalities between these two areas that would meet the sort of boundary criteria. So just to wrap it up, I just wanted to show the revised neighborhood association map that would include this boundary change to include Johns Woods within the Uplands Neighborhood Association boundary. And with that, I'll open it up to the commission for questions and discussion.
Perfect, thank you very much. Commissioners, any questions? Oh, Commissioner Phillips.
So are we allowed to ask the
Sure.
people here? Okay.
Speak into the mic so we can hear you.
Okay. My questions are in the spirit of just wanting to understand, because I'm being asked to vote on something. It's not got anything to do with any inherent opposition to what you're trying to do. Fair enough?
Sure.
Okay. So so one party we have not heard anything from that I can gather is the Mountain Park Association. Do they exist? I checked on the line, they do have one.
The Neighborhood Association?
Right?
The Mountain Park Neighborhood Association?
Right, Neighborhood Association.
Yes, there is one, and we contacted them when Erik suggested either Uplands or Mountain Park, and we did not find them very welcoming or very involved. And so we didn't want to just become another piece of something that wasn't really doing anything. We wanted to participate in a neighborhood association that was thoughtful and met regularly and was involved with the city, and, you know, we just felt that was a better fit.
All I have is what I'm reading here, and the things that I read that you said that you benefited from being inside of this Uplands were things that, when I was a president of an HOA in a different state, obviously, but these are things that I routinely did as the president of an HOA. So I'm a little curious to why you would need an Uplands Association to do the jobs, the things
Yes, it isn't, it doesn't impact, the Homeowners Association stays the same, but we're somewhat limited because we are not part of a neighborhood association, so we're not afforded the voice that a neighborhood association has with the city. We have common interests with Boones Ferry Road, the tennis center, and Springbrook Park that we would like to, you know, assist in discussions with how those properties are maintained and how our homeowners can volunteer or participate in those. We're also very active in getting our emergency preparedness situation squared away, and Uplands is also, and they have a container at the junior high where they have all of their supplies, and the hope is that if we can join their neighborhood association, we would be able to store our supplies, get a grant, and assist our homeowners to be ready in case of an emergency. So those are things that we can't really do just as a homeowners association. I mean, we could, if we increased our dues, you know, and we don't have any place really to house emergency preparedness supplies, so it's really, and we also have the personnel who are very involved with emergency preparedness, which is something that the Uplands Neighborhood Association is happy to have join.
We have the infrastructure. We have a captain system where there's pieces of each of the neighborhood. Each, like several streets will be put together where people know each other and they have regular like events like picnics in the summer, et cetera. But we didn't have a person lead that. And they have a very involved person who would take over the, managing those captains. So we were looking forward to that.
Yeah, it was a
actually.
win-win situation, we
Yeah.
felt.
And
I would just
if-
like to weigh in and say, I've lived in Johns Woods, and my husband and I built 4 of the houses in there. So
Oh.
I'm very familiar with Johns Woods, and I'm surprised it hasn't joined Uplands before this. It makes perfect sense to me that you're very symbiotic with housing stock and size of lots and mutual interests with Springbrook Park. So for me, it's really pretty much a no-brainer.
Madam Chair, before we get into deliberation, just wanted to check, I see, for the record, I see nobody in the audience wishing to testify. Christina, is there anybody signed up? No. All right, so you might want to, okay, you
Okay?
can
I'm
close
just-
testimony, proceed with
yeah.
deliberation.
I would just add one thing, I guess, to what Susan had mentioned before, in response to Commissioner Phillips' question. The city does actively try to ensure that we can cover as many different areas of the city as possible through recognition as a neighborhood association because, they are eligible for neighborhood enhancement program grants. And, those are certainly, of course, as you might know, there are ways for homeowners associations to pay for things, but this is something that's a citywide program, really requires citywide coordination. And that's something that we've been able to do within the sort of neighborhood enhancement grant program so far. So that's one, benefit, but also just the ability, again, to sort of be a formal part of land use decisions, get the mailings sent to the neighborhood association and then, distributed to their members. A lot of the land use activity around the city, land use development decisions that are being considered within a certain neighborhood association will be sort of solicited, and folks within the neighborhood associations are notified by our contacts. If they don't have a neighborhood association, then that kind of breaks down a bit. So it's really a good way for the city to get out more notice to more folks and just have them be more engaged.
Absolutely. Commissioner Mitchell?
Yeah, for Mr. Olson, was there any drawback in having them join Uplands as opposed to Mountain Park from the planning department's perspective?
Honestly, the only drawback is that it just doesn't look as clean, I guess, on a map. But I think when it comes to almost every single, criteria or criterion that we would evaluate this through, I think that it's the better fit compared to Mountain Park. And again, it is kind of its own sort of ecosystem of neighborhood associations up there, homeowners associations rather. So, it is a large geography in Mountain Park as well. And it really just seemed like there were a lot more common issues and proximity to Uplands. So,
Thank you.
Any other commissioners have questions or comments?
One more, okay, and then this is the final question that I've got, is there, I'm sure this has already been looked at, but just to make sure, is there any circumstance that you could ever envision the two entities here that you would be butting heads and this could become a legal issue at some point? I believe a homeowners association has a legal entity and you're more of an advisory to, that may not be the right word. So I can't picture that would ever happen, but I would like to just make sure that would never happen.
If I may, Madam Chair, Mr. Chair, neighborhood associations are required under citizen involvement guidelines to communicate to the Planning Commission and to the DRC both majority and minority positions of the neighborhood. So no neighborhood walks in lockstep with any one proposal. So it's certainly possible that the property owners within John's Landing may have a different viewpoint on certain matters than other property owners in Uplands, and they would be free to communicate those. The neighborhood association would be expected to communicate that.
I can just tell you from, we have Rainbow is another one of the homeowners associations within Uplands, and we're actually their advocate on a lot of stuff. I don't think we're going to be butting heads. I mean, we'll probably wind up being your advocate for things more than anything else.
And yeah, we have our own set of rules within we have CC&Rs that we have to follow that pretty much set up the guidelines for our homeowners. And I can't imagine anything that would cause us to, I mean, if anything, we would disengage.
Yeah.
Well, and typically, I
From
mean,
my experience, that you could have an individual homeowner, as you said, that would be mad at both of you, okay?
Yeah, I mean, that's possible.
Madam Chair, a homeowners association is about managing the common property of the homeowners association. A neighborhood association is talking about the community-wide interests. So, I mean, they really have different focuses, so.
I think it's really advantageous for Johns Woods to join Uplands Neighborhood Association. It just gives more voice to more people in our community and gets them involved in our community, and that's one of the most important things we can have.
Yeah, I would just kind of further point out that we have a lot of neighborhood associations that have sort of homeowners associations, smaller geographies sort of located within the neighborhood associations. And as City Attorney or Deputy Attorney Boone pointed out, they serve different purposes. So there's, sometimes some confusion as to, what the neighborhood association does versus what the homeowners association does, but it is something that exists throughout the city and folks are fairly comfortable with navigating. So. That we haven't at least heard of the conflicts that have existed between those two entities in those situations, but it seems to be going very smoothly.
Seeing no other further discussion, should we vote on this measure then?
That would be appropriate and would help us give a recommendation to City Council.
Okay. I need a motion to approve the Johns Woods Upland Neighborhood Association boundary change request, PP 23-0003.
I'll move to approve. I think the analysis is pretty well laid out, so I would support it.
Okay, do I have a motion to, are you asking, is that the motion?
I did move, yes.
Okay, you moved, okay. I need a second.
Second.
Thank you. Can we call for the roll vote, please?
Okay, Peak,
Yes.
Mitchell,
Yes.
Moreno,
Yes.
Phillips, and Stewart.
Yes.
Thank you. It is approved 5-0. And I've already said my piece, but I congratulate you all for putting this together. I think it's a really good fit, and thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
All right, moving on to other business. Do we have other business this evening?
We do. A couple items. First of which, I would just like to circle back to an email distributed by Iris last week, pointing out that we are looking for this year's representative from the Planning Commission for the Neighborhood Enhancement Program. Commissioner Phillips is no longer able to serve as the representative from the Planning Commission, so we were hoping to get somebody else on board, and we will be picking that up in the coming month or so. So I'm not sure if the commission has had a chance to discuss that at all, but we could use a representative.
Thank you. It's an interesting process, isn't it?
As my predecessor gave me the benefit of before I volunteered, listen, this is about as simple a job as you can get, okay? It's very low time amount. They organize it such that they've got more money than people that want the money, which, I mean, so you just vote yes for everything generally, it looks like to me. So that was my experience anyway, so.
Perfect, thank you. Do we have anybody who would like to step up to the plate on this? Otherwise, you'll get appointed.
I'll volunteer.
Thank you.
After Mr. Phillips' support here.
Thank you, Commissioner Mitchell. Commissioner Mitchell will be our liaison to the Neighborhood Enhancement Grant Program.
The only thing you have to watch out for, Don, is there are people that apply, or organizations that apply that don't qualify to apply. They don't even belong to the city, okay?
Yeah, so we will be working with you, Commissioner Mitchell, and the rest of the NEP grant committee this year to schedule a meeting before we put out the solicitation for this year's grants. So really just going over the program guide, talking through some of the particulars that Commissioner Phillips was just mentioning. So yeah, we'll be sure to give you some background and not throw you in without any of a debriefing there for you. So
I can tell you firsthand, I wrote a grant for a really beautiful permanent bench on the corner of Melrose and Kingsgate back in the day when you could do it on private land. Now you only can do it on city public land.
Or a
And,
very publicly prominent location.
right, and this is, and we just had this stoned area because the kids were cutting across it. And it just, ever since I went past it, I said, it needs a bench. And it's this beautiful black, it'll last, I'll be in my grave long past before it will ever need to be replaced. It's set in concrete. And it warms my heart when I drive by and people are sitting there waiting for their kids, or the kids are sitting there with their backpacks. And so that, it's rewarding. I may
Yeah,
apply
lots of
for another
short-term
grant.
reward, yeah. And I would just mention the other business item we have tonight is we have an interim Director of Community Development, Jessica Numanoglu, who's going to give you all an introduction.
Thank you.
There we go. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to introduce myself. As Erik said, my name is Jessica Numanoglu, and I've been asked to serve as the interim director after the departure of Scott Siegel. A little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me, and I will say I have worked with Commissioner Stewart before, as well as Commissioner Heap, who's not here tonight. But I know that I'm a new face for most of you. But I've actually worked for the city for 22 years. This month actually is my anniversary, so very well-versed and familiar with the city. Been in the planning department that whole time, and in fact, before this position, the few weeks that I've been in this position, I was the deputy director, I guess still am the deputy director for the department. I just want to let you know that my hope is that you don't see any real big changes during this transition as we look for the next director. Planning Manager Olson will still continue to be the liaison to the Planning Commission as well as your main contact. As Scott Siegel was, I will be a working manager, so you will see me present for projects here over the next few months. In fact, the upcoming psilocybin time, place, and manner regulations, you have a study session on the 24th. I'm working with Paul Espy on that, and I'll be presenting at that study session. Another project that I am the lead on actually is the Urban and Community Forestry Plan update. It's not a project that will come before the commission for a recommendation to the City Council. However, I will be in contact with Chair Leek to potentially schedule a joint study session with the Development Review Commission and the Planning Commission in the upcoming months, because we do want to get feedback and have you review some products during that update. So the Planning Commission will be involved in that project as well.
And which project again?
That's the update to the Urban and Community Forestry Plan.
Okay.
And that will, it follows, we did an update to the State of the Urban Forest Report. It was a report that had been done back in 2009, and the Urban and Community Forestry Plan dates back to 2007. So we're definitely due for an update on both of those projects, and that will hopefully provide some policy direction on managing our urban forest and potential tree code or other amendments to other codes related to trees. So more to come on that. We're still in the process of selecting the consultant, so we're at the very beginning stages of that project. And I would just wrap it up by saying, it's big shoes to fill. Scott Siegel was a great director, and we miss him. We already miss him, but I certainly am going to do my best to fill his shoes until we get our permanent director. And if you need anything, of course, I'm available. And I think you'll see me a lot at the upcoming planning commissions over the next few months. And if you have any questions or comments or concerns, happy to answer.
Seeing none, I thank you very much for the presentation and the introduction.
Yeah, thanks. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
J. Edgar Hoover started out as...
Oh. No comment.
Lasted 40 years, I believe.
All right, so let's go over the schedule review.
All right, so we have some updates to discuss with the schedule review. I'd say the first thing I'd want to mention is that as we communicated via email a few weeks back, the city has decided to put the Palisades Overlay project on hold. Primarily, this is due to an onslaught, if you will, a large legislative session going on at the state level right now, the Oregon legislature. There are a number of different bills, House bills or Senate bills that could have a big impact on what we do here as a city in terms of adopting land use regulations. In particular, one bill that we're concerned about that would have a large impact on this overlay and all overlays, presumably, is Senate Bill 3414, which is a bill that would essentially allow, or I guess the way to word this is, it would force the city to approve variances for nearly everything other than floor area and a few other sort of minor, I think height was one of those things, and density and use. So that they're really like reining in our variance procedures and practices that we use right now, such that a lot of the overlay standards might be nullified to a degree because we'd have to approve a variance for them otherwise. So anyway, we are tracking that bill as well as several others. We expect to know a little bit more about how those turn out by June or July of this year, but we are, as we pointed out a little bit earlier, but we are, as I guess it was Councilor Afghan has mentioned, engaged with advocacy on some of these items and actually are issuing letters of either support or opposition to various different items that are on the legislative agenda in this larger packet. So we're staying actively engaged. We have concerns about some things. We are in support of others, but right now there's just so much going on that we didn't want to move forward with that for the time being.
Busy time for you right now. Just before I recognize your question while I remember it, going back to variances and neighborhood overlays, would the new legislation nullify those?
It wouldn't necessarily nullify the overlay, but it would make it such that the city would have to approve variance to things like, a different sort of setback plane, pitch, if you will, things that we were thinking about adopting for the Palisades overlay, as well as things that are adopted in other overlay districts throughout the city that don't relate specifically to use, density, floor area, and height. Things that are usually covered by an overlay could be very easy to get a variance for as a result of that legislation. So again, it's really unclear even when they do pass these bills. Typically, there's a lot of rulemaking that follows in terms of like what will actually happen, how it will be implemented, but we're seeing a lot of items that are concerning right now.
It seems from what I've followed, because I'm in real estate and I hear about this a lot of these things that are coming through the legislature are mandates, density mandates. I mean, my question is, how do you mandate something if someone doesn't want to build it because they can't afford to build it in the place where you're mandating housing? Help me here.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tricky conversation. Of course, I think the state is kind of throwing everything that they can to get housing against the wall, and they're hearing a lot of proposals from developers and just saying, okay, and putting that forward. So obviously, cities like Oswego are in a position where we need to come out and say, hey, like, you should listen to us a little bit. We have concerns. So I think that's kind of where we're at in this process. But it's still a bit unclear as to what will actually go through. So we'll keep you posted. Absolutely.
Even if it goes through, how did anyway? Yeah.
Yeah, it's.
You need to get the state legislatures in here to answer those questions.
Commissioner Mitchell.
If I recall on the Palisades overlay, the Palisades residents were sort of wanted to move it along as quickly. So I'm wondering how communicating this, what is a very reasonable and understanding, I'm going to call it a delay, like what was their reaction, or did they understand why we're waiting?
Thanks for that question. They seem to be very understanding of where we're at with this. They were also interested in tracking some of this legislation, but I would say, we have heard a lot of folks that were from the neighborhood association that were in support, but we also we got a lot of testimony from folks that were concerned about it within the neighborhood association as well. So I wouldn't say that it was that there was complete consensus, I guess, within the neighborhood association to move forward with the overlay either. So,
It's interesting because Palisades is an area that could be really impacted by middle housing and these new rules. Commissioner Phillips? Stewart, I mean, Phil Stewart.
So can you tell me again what the House bill number, 30?
3414, yeah, there's actually, there was a presentation recently to council last week about the larger sort of set of different legislation that's going through right now, and it was mostly focused on land use and zoning. So I would be happy to email you all a link to that following tonight's meeting so you can stay up to speed on what council is hearing.
Thank you. Commissioner Mitchell, did you have another question? Okay, good. All right. Anything else on schedule review you wanted to go
So
over?
that's just one item on schedule review. I have a couple more, though. I just wanted to point out really quickly that as we heard from Councilor Afghan earlier today, the ministerial mitigation proposal, we have direction to sort of bring that back to the commission. So as you may or may not recall, back in October of last year, we held a public hearing at the Planning Commission related to code amendments to establish a process that would allow the city to require public improvements for ministerial proposals, now that middle housing is a ministerial type of application. After we held that hearing and you had asked staff to go and draft findings for your consideration, we had heard from the city council. We held a study session actually at city council, and they asked us to put that on pause and go back and do a little bit of research. So that's what we did. We talked to some developers and got some cost estimates for different public improvements that we've required around the city. As Councilor Afghan mentioned, we then went back to council last week, talked about the results of those conversations and got some direction. There was not a clear consensus that all of council, was gung-ho on approving the proposal, but that's why we take things to a public hearing to hear what the public has to say and to have further conversation. So they did at least come to a consensus to ask staff to bring that back to a hearing at the council. Long story short, what that means is that we're going to be considering findings for that, which we hadn't actually adopted the findings from the public hearing, but we'll bring those findings back on April 24th, so in about a month. So that will then allow, once the Planning Commission has adopted findings, that to move forward to a council hearing. So that's one update on the mitigation for ministerial development proposal.
Eric, if I can just, if any commissioners were not present during that process, under legislative, you are eligible to vote on anything. So if you wish to review the record on that, Eric can provide the link and the video for any testimony that was made on that, because you'll be asked to vote on the findings.
A bit of a different procedure. We're not used to taking this big of a pause between the hearing and the findings, but I think we should be good to go. The one other thing that I wanted to mention is that we did end up pushing back the city council date to bring the Johns Woods Upland Neighborhood Association boundary change request that we discussed tonight to council, quite simply because we wanted to ensure that we could include the Planning Commission's recommendation within
You mean the Commission for Citizens Involvement?
That's right. I do mean the Commission for Citizen Involvement's recommendation. Chair Leak, that's a good point. So, I just wanted to make sure to come to you all before we went to City Council and discussed it further. But that's set to go to Council on May 2nd, which should still allow them time to apply for an NEP grant this year. And that would be all of the schedule updates for tonight.
So when is our next psilocybin work session? That is the 24th?
That's right. So the psilocybin work session is scheduled for the 24th, along with consideration of the findings for the mitigation for ministerial development. At our next meeting, we will be discussing the housing needs analysis, some of the draft documents. Those are actually distributed earlier last week, about exactly a week ago on the 20th. So you should have copies of some of those draft documents, but of course, staff report will be coming and meeting materials for the 10th will be coming shortly. So that will be your next actual work session. We'll be really sort of diving into the results of the buildable lands inventory and housing capacity analysis. And then, yes, on the 24th, we'll be talking a little bit more about psilocybin on that date.
So that's going to be a very busy meeting.
Yes, I mean, we will, again, there will be two different meetings. So on the 10th, we'll talk about the HNA documents, and then on the 24th, we'll talk about psilocybin. So hopefully, we won't talk about them on the same day.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right, seeing nothing else on our agenda to take care of and no other comments to be made, I call this meeting adjourned.